If you are a traditionalist, then you are to look at literature as anything that is written. Because etymology, it is what it is. But then again, if you are a nonconformist, then you would look at literature as a restrictively defined term. Ano? So, in fact, critics have also not themselves succeeded in using the word literature with appreciable consistency. Okay, you would hear others use literature as pertaining to scholarly articles. You would hear others pertain to literature as the totality of anything that is written. And no, you would hear other people such as myself regard literature as only available to the creative or imaginative works. So there's no consistency with how we use the term literature. And if you are to argue, sir, how about in the event of such standardized criteria that will point to us the literary or non-literariness of a composition? Now, would that mean that we can now objectively define what literature is? The answer would be no, or at least I think the answer would be no. Criteria is at the end of the day, we will judge criteria. We will look at criteria. We will judge criteria based on our own biases. Okay, and in the event of such criteria, yun nga, we will judge it still according to our subjectivity. Kaya nga, di ba, whenever there are competitions and there are a set of criteria, notice that the judges have given different ratings for the same criteria because they are looking at this criteria based on their own perception. Okay? And ito din, it's also a testament on the subjectivity of reality. Ano? And then like what I repeatedly argued, that if you are to look at literature as anything that is written, then the term would appear as if it is an infinite, never-ending term. So some line of demarcation or separation, distinction must be drawn if we want to look at literature as anything or less than a purely indefinite, almost infinite term. So even Morley, another scholar of literature, had agreed to previous notions pertaining to the limited or restrictive nature of literature, and that according to him, literature consists of all the books and they are not so many. And according to him, the literature or these books that is part of the literary arsenal are those with moral truth and human passion, and those works that are able to touch people with certain largeness, severity, and attractiveness of form. But I get it that last discussion you have an argument to pose here, Jefferson. Tama.
Yes, sir.
And that would be
Ano po, sir, it is also problematic slash restrictive in a sense that if we are to say that literature, although it is an attempt to encapture literature as everything that is in its material form, the books, it is parang problematic to say na na it consists of they consist of moral truths and human passion when in fact there were arguably literature, or let's to set aside the argument na lang, let's just say written works that are not written to tell us of the moral truth, and they are not written as motivated by passion for human passion. So to say na literature is every book where moral truth and human passion are touched is can be wrong in itself kasi yun nga, not every book is written with the truth and not written with passion. At least on my end. Yun po.
okay. So ano ba pwede kong reaction dyan? I cannot, of course, and I cannot say that I can't vouch whether it is truthful in all sense or that's questionable kasi that's how tawag mo rito, refinement of knowledge works. Ano, talagang kaya din philosophy ang subject, ano, or at least philosophy of literature on subject. We have to examine existing issues, and part of examining those issues is, of course, forming, okay, different philosophies on literature. And for Jefferson, this definition by Morley would appear problematic. Ano, kaya talaga in terms of like this, in terms of the study of philosophy, there are conflicting ideas in itself. And that's why there are certain frameworks that we adhere to, say, to explain something. And at the end, we are not saying that this is the truth, that this is wrong, or this is this is the complete opposite. We're not contesting that. However, we accept this as part of like our examination of knowledge. And then Trent, actually, apart from that, Trent had also underscored the limited nature of literature. He also had attributed the emotional segment as what is more important, rather than the intellectual value of what literature has to offer. Because according to him, the teaching as well as the criticism of literature will greatly improve the moment that we start paying more attention to the emotive rather than the intellectual qualities of literature, or so to say, what literature does rather than what it is. Okay? So why we read literature, this is a simplified, or at least no, some of the reasons, or majority of the reasons why we read literature. But then again, the point of this is that whenever you read literature, it's okay if your reason is just to pass time, for like wala kang magawa, for you to just do something, that's fine, because that's part of recycling literature. That's part of finding other purposes to read literature. And regardless if you're following its original intention or not, you are contributing to its longevity. And that's fine. But then again, to have a more founded purpose in reading literature, you should have, of course, a reason, a real reason to read literature. Okay. So it might appear contradictory to what we previously said a while ago, that according to Trent, it should focus more on the emotive rather than the intellectual segment of literature whenever we try to learn about it. Ano, we of course still, in so many schools, test literature as an intellectual entity. Kasi we of course use literature to test comprehension. Okay, to institutionalize certain concepts and facts according to Ten Brink in 1998. And then according to Stern in 1987, there's a great influence of literature to language learning. So why is there a need to test literature? Primarily, itong reasons na to, itong rationale na to, it's more on the intellectual value of literature. So it might appear contradictory nga as to what we have said a while ago, that literature should, or the teaching and criticism of literature should only reside on, or so at least more reside on the emotional aspect. Okay? So to develop comprehension, to develop literary competence, part of those are the reasons why we test literature, and then to bring a literary piece of art to students' intellectual and emotional baggage, and then to develop decision making and meaning making. Okay. And then formats for testing literature, you're already acquainted to this, oral and written test. And then common types. Actually, this one is from Barrett's taxonomy of cognitive and affective domains in comprehension. Itong levels na to. Okay, so testing literal comprehension, answers can be easily found on the text. Testing reorganization involves arranging ideas to show that the whole concept has been understood. It's either you summarize, you categorize, you reclassify. Testing inference, of course, is making inferences or predicting or guessing. But note that it's not an ordinary guess. It should be a wise guess. Answer should be reflective on the evidences presented or made directly or in the text. And then testing evaluation calls for students to compare information and ideas in the text. And then appreciation test necessitates students to articulate emotional and aesthetic responses. So forms of literature tests, alam na natin to, multiple identification, gap filling. Essay could be subjective or objective based on the question. And then the knowledge question, which is philosophical in nature. If you can recall yung first activity natin on the critical paper, the questions provided there are knowledge questions. And then common types ulit, test of literary interpretation if it is question that do not require contact with the text. And it's test of literary information if these are questions that require contact with the text. And then aside from Barrett's taxonomy, we have Bloom's taxonomy as another framework that educators use whenever they make questions. Regarding a literary piece. In Bloom's taxonomy, it has 6 levels, which is one level higher than Barrett's. And in Bloom's taxonomy, creating is the highest form of knowledge. So just because you are able to memorize every explicit information about the text, it does not mean that you are will pass the exam. Since there are questions that requires higher level of understanding. So I think I have already given you this in your previous years kasi this is a this part no this part only is a recycled presentation. But this is just a how I format examinations. So in the remembering, okay, of course these are questions that whose answers are easily provided in the text. No, and of course meaning if you do not know the topic, then you cannot definitely answer the question. Okay, letter A nga ang sagot yan. And then understanding it's also a complex level given that in order for one to exhibit understanding, one should learn or one should know how to interpret, exemplify, summarize, infer, compare, and explain. So you in this question, it might appear as if all of the options are correct. Yes, Ray boy. You have a question?
Close associations can yield disrespect, sir.
Okay, so for this question, that is the correct answer. However, sabi ko nga, under this level, it's quite complex because you have to perform other skills relative to understanding. Okay? Kasi understanding din as a term, medyo nakalilito. Okay, how do we know if we understand? Okay? And then for applying, no, normally this is the level of this is the level given in mathematics classes as you will be needing formulas to answer certain equations. Okay, but in case of literature, we have literary theories. And note that all of the literary theories are of course applicable to all the literary selections. It's just that it so happens that there are certain literary theories that fits well for certain literary pieces. Okay, best no, it best fits for certain literary pieces, but it does not mean that there are wrong literary theories to use as lenses or frameworks in understanding a literary text. So in this case, it is Marxism. And then analyzing is looking at the parts. It's different from synthesizing, which is looking at it as a whole. So this question requires that you should know, or this type of question is also a form of remembering question in a way that if you do not know Jane Eyre, the Brothers Karamazov, and A Christmas Carol, you won't be able to answer the question. But then again, it's in analyzing because you have to look at the commonality among these three and for you to arrive at a correct answer, which is letter C. They all have biblical themes. And then you have evaluating, making judgments based on criteria and standards through checking and critiquing. So for this one, sample question from Greek mythology, what role did Oedipus hubris play in the fulfillment of prophecy? So you have to evaluate what role did hubris came to play in the fulfillment of the prophecy. And then creating is the highest form of knowledge that requires you to master previous levels. Kasi di ba, looking at creating, you have to come up with something that is innovative. And before you could even do that, one should master the previous levels. Okay, so when applied to Goldilocks and the Three Bears, this would how the questions will appear for each level. Now we have the literary forms, divisions, and then subdivisions. Dito na natapos yung sa iba. Okay? So do you have any idea at all why we need to classify literature following this hierarchy? Normally we whenever we search for literary or the constituents of literature, what keywords do we use? And do you see any problem with using that keywords whenever we search for literary constituents? Ano kaya yung keyword na sinasabi natin? Genre, okay. So whenever we look for literary constituents, we normally search for literary genres. But okay, whenever we search for literary genres, what results normally pop? Or what results normally show? And do you find any trouble with that? Or is it like confusing? Anyone? Yes, Jefferson.
Sir, I just did a quick Google search and sabi dito from sources across the web, we have fiction, we have novel, we have genre fiction, we have narrative, non-fiction, science fiction, poetry. So on one hand, if we are, it is problematic kasi parang hindi iisa yung tinutukoy nila. And
Okay.
that, for example, we have fiction and non-fiction. It can be that they are categories by themselves. Pero, for example, drama. Drama in itself can be fictional or non-fictional. So, parang let's look at parang yung what is available online is para siyang draw lots, ganun. Para siyang
Draw.
pinaghalo-halong paper, nakalagay
Okay.
sa box na inalog. And then, there is no particular subdivision and there is no larger form. Walang larger form that can enclose smaller and more niche forms such as, ayun nga sir, na, like, siguro not in this particular diagram, but for example, poetry, ganun. So, may mga talaga sir, may mga genres that are bigger than others. Kaya it is confusing kasi they are made to appear as if they are in the same levels of organization. Yun sir.
Okay, very good. Kasi if we were to put all the literary constituents under one umbrella, which is literary genres, then there wouldn't be, again, the problem would go back to the first premise, which is if we are to look at literature as anything that is written, then in itself would appear as an infinite term. And having to say also that they all fit under one category or under one umbrella, it will appear rather confusing, since there are certain characteristics now, even though they share a large scheme of a similarity among them, there are still characteristics that they themselves have that other constituents
Wasak
do
dito.
not possess. Okay, so that is what makes it
Kasi yard mo lang.
confusing. So it would be
What? Seriously?
better if we are to look at ano if we are to look at literature, at least adhering to this organizational chart. Sabi nga that there are bigger, sabi nga ni Jefferson, that there are bigger literary constituents than the other, or there are literary constituents that encompasses the others. Okay, so looking at our organizational chart here, it would make sense that the first line or the first row or set of constituents are the literary forms. So how do we tell that these are the literary forms? And how do we tell that they are the divisions? How do we tell that they are the subdivisions? How do we fit these constituents into certain categories or into certain hierarchies? What point of consideration should we look at? Any idea? Any idea? Sige, Jefferson.
What I know best, sir, is yung forms of literature kasi basically it can be heard, it can be seen, or it can be read. Pero it can also be watched, ganun. So literature can be largely manifested in three forms in which appeals to our senses. That is, we can hear it through oral literature, we can read it through written literature, or either write it, or I either watch it, sorry, through visual literature. And I think that is the forms. Divisions in that there are two, actually, prose and poetry are the two divisions, as I remember from previous courses, if that is even right. It is basically dividing literature into those that has story and those that is more on creative and basta parang mga tula. Poetry, it is written in metric forms, ganon. It has rules, but it can also be free. Pero mostly prose is more narrative than is creative, since poetry is more of creative. So they are the great divisions of literature, and that they can all and what this implies in this hierarchy is that prose can be watched, can be dramatized, can be read, ganun din sa prose. Kaya nga may teledramas, merong novels, merong podcast. So ayun. Of course, under prose there are fictional and non-fictional, and ito yung mga subdivisions because they are the classes that is under the divisions, which is the higher kind. Yun po, sir.
Okay. So, that's correct, But when we look at the literary forms, ayun, tama naman sabi ni Jefferson, I'm just providing an alternative view to it. Literary forms are we're looking at how literature was administered, whether orally, in written, or in visual. But in the philosophy of literature in your course, it questions then visual literature as a legitimate literary constituent, because not everything presented, not everything you watch is visual literature. So I'm not going to expound on the reason why. We're just going to save it for another day. Okay. So we're looking at how literature was administered for literary forms. Okay, or how literature is received, either orally, or for a lot of traditions, or literary traditions originated from oral literature. That is why that would explain yung mga alamat, mga kwentong bayan na meron dito sa Pilipinas ay walang distinct writer. Kasi initially they were oral traditions. Gaya ng Beowulf. Beowulf walang author. Hindi mo point out kung sino nagsulat because Beowulf was originally an oral tradition. Okay? And then someone had took the initiative to record it, thereby preserving Beowulf. Okay, and then written, we all know what written literature is. Okay, and then in terms of the literary divisions, we're looking at the structure, whether it is prosaic or poetry. Okay, so prosaic uses simple language, no, or as compared with poetry, it's much more simpler. Okay, and then prosaic form mimics conversational speech. Kasi di ba we speak in paragraphs, we speak in fragments, we speak in sentences. So that's why then a lot of the readings that we have right now for textbooks, the narrative stories are translated into prosaic form. Okay? Because it's much simpler to understand. Di naman tayo sumasagot ng patula. Diba? And then poetry, of course, compared with prosaic form, a prosaic structure, it is much more sophisticated given that it uses meter, no, it has rhyme, okay? So that's poetry. But both of these structures, being that they are under literature or they are encapsulated in literature, they are both coded text. Okay, coded text meaning that what you read there should not be taken literally. Okay, they are figurative. Okay, coded text siya, pareho. Okay, and just because I said that a while ago, prosaic form is much more simpler, it does not mean that it's totally simple. Okay, because it is still a coded text. Okay, and then we have under divisions to subdivisions, we're looking at the execution of such context, the peculiarities, for each content. Like for fiction, you would judge that it is fiction if the content is imaginative, or at least, what we consider traditionally as imaginative. And then we have nonfiction. Okay? And then under poetry, we have the following, but we would be discussing that as we go with the discussion. Okay? Pero normally, ang naririnig kong mali sa estudyante is that narrative is under prosaic. Narrative is poetry. Okay? So I have already explained this, and prose is the most difficult form of language, applying ordinary grammatical structure and natural flow of speech rather than rhythmic structure. Poetry, on the other hand, is a form of literary art which uses aesthetic qualities of language to evoke meanings in addition to or in place of the prosaic ostensible meaning. The subdivisions of prose include fiction, okay, prosaic fiction, deals in part or in whole with information or events that are not factual, but rather imaginary. So these are the examples: fairy tales, mythologies, legends, novels, novelettes, short stories, fables, parables, and allegories. While nonfiction are communicative work whose assertions and descriptions are understood to be factual. Parang kanina, note that dito, sabi communicative work. Kanina sabi natin that communication and expression is different because communication is simpler and it is done at the moment of speech. Okay, so it goes on to show that nonfiction is a communicative work because it is, of course, simpler. It is not imaginative, not unlike imaginative works that are in the field of expression. And note that reporting the beliefs of others in a non-fiction format is not necessarily an endorsement of the ultimate veracity of those beliefs or the truthfulness of such beliefs. It's simply saying that it is true that people believe them. Kumbaga, it manifests. No, you're not endorsing it. It's something that is factual. Okay. And the non-fiction ranges from works that are, of course, what is mentioned. So let's now have the narrative. Let's now have the subdivisions, for poetry. Narrative is a form of poetry which tells a story, often making use of the voices of a narrator and characters. Okay, and this could be short or long, can be complex. It is usually dramatic. It includes epics, ballads, ideals, and then lays. Narrative because it narrates a story. It's not in prosic form. It's in poetry form, and it has a lot. It has certain subcategories to it. For one, we have epic. We have Iliad. We have Odyssey. Binababasa natin na Iliad at Odyssey na nakatranslate na into paragraphs. Those are prosic adaptations for the sake of easier consumption. Okay, kasi nga sabi natin, prose mimics conversational speech. And if we are accustomed to such language structure, then it would be much easier for us to understand it rather than to have it put into its original form, which is in a narrative poetry form. And then ballad is a narrative poem with harmony in rhythm. And being that it is under narrative, it tells, of course, then a story. Now, can you give me an example of a ballad? Ano pwede maging example natin sa ballad? Anyone? Bridal ballad. Okay. How about in terms of like Filipino traditions? Or tawag mo dito, um, colonial influence that Filipinos tend to practice even up to now. Ano kaya pwede maging example ng ballad? Remember, it is a narrative, so it tells a story. And it has harmony and rhythm. That's why it is in ballad. Ano kaya pwede maging example ng isang colonial influence na pinapractice ng mga Filipinos na example ng ballad? Magtanim ay di biro. Okay. It is a okay. Harana song. I think that would qualify more as a song kasi may accompaniment na. But this is just harmony and rhythm. Anong ritual, Michelina? Ano pa kaya? Ano example na napapanahon? Ano pa ang pwede maging example na napapanahon ngayon? Yes, pabasa. 'Di ba? 'Di ba siya example ng ng ballad? 'Di ba it is the life and death, 'di ba, of Jesus Christ. Kaya siya ballad. And then it is recited with harmony and rhythm. Kaya siya example ng ballad. Any more examples? Wala na. Okay, so let's move to the next one. And then under narrative, we still have idyll and lay. And an idyll is a narrative poem about rustic life. Ano ba yung rustic? Ibang lagi itong ginagawang motif kapag nuptial shoot. Ano ba yung rustic? Rural farming. Okay. So basically, it is life in the country. Ano, hindi yung country na bansa, ha? It's just country meaning rural or farmland. Diba? So that's rustic life. So lay is written in octosyllabic couplets, and it deals with tales of adventure, romance, and chivalry. So next one is lyric. Yung mga sinabi nyo kanina, ano, yung um, harana, that would qualify more as a song. Okay? Lyric expresses personal and emotional feelings. So another example of it is a sonnet, no? Which is consisting of 14 iambic pentameter lines. Pero yan na yung kay Shakespeare. Ano? Eh, sa Petrarchan sonnet, ilan? Ilan ang sa Petrarchan sonnet kaya? Ilan sa Petrarchan sonnet? Or magkapareho lang? Ano ba talaga? Anyone? Yes, Jefferson. As usual.
Grabe naman, sir. Ay, ano, sir, ang nakalagay sa, wag na natin i-mention ang source dahil hindi siya harangal-rangal. Hindi siya marangal.
Wikipedia ba?
Oo, sir. Pero okay lang, hindi naman to academic work. So anyways, ang naalala ko, sir, dito, naturo na siya sa amin dati pero hindi alam mo naman, sir, ang ang archaic forms ng poetry ay hindi naman kagamit-gamit sa pang-araw-araw na buhay. Pero yung sir, yung octave, yung first 8 lines ay yung aba-aba na form. Yung A,
Hmm,
B, B, A,
okay.
A, B, B, A. Yun yung first octave. And then, octave meaning 8, octa. And then sextet daw is yung next na 6. And usually, ang format niya is C, D, E, C, D, or C, D, C, D, C, D. Yung letters, they just mean na yung lines na yun, yung mga letters na yun, they have the same rhyme. So, yun, sir. Either may tatlong rhyme doon sa sextet, C, D, E, C, D, E. Parang dalawang succession of different sequential rhymes or C, D, C, D, C, D. So, tatlong sequence ng C, D, C, D rhyme lang sa sextet.
Okay, so basically that's it. And then in terms of focus then, what can we tell about the focus of Petrarchan sonnet? So both are 14 lines, of course, being that they are sonnets. Okay? Then in terms of focus, ano kaya? Okay, normally it's about what? Love. 'Di ba? Sonnets. Okay, sige. Medyo inaantok na tayo kaya bibilisan na lang natin. Okay, so under still no under lyric we have ode and elegy. Okay, so elegy again is different from eulogy. The elegy is lament and it's under the poetry division, while eulogy it's more on praise and then in prosaic structure or division. Okay, so yun na nga ang difference ng eulogy tsaka elegy, diba? So don't be confused. Elegy and eulogy belong to different divisions of literature. And then one, in terms of content, is about praise, and then the other one is about lament. And then, let's now continue on drama. So, isa lang ang gusto kong ipaliwanag nyo sa akin dito. Why is it influenced by collaborative production and collective reception? And what do we mean by this too? Isipin yung mabuti. When you watch drama, ano, what could be pertaining to collaborative production and collective reception? Yes, Archie.
Sir, yung napapansin ko pa naman po ang drama, ano po siya? Kasi po, di ba, yung drama kasi kailangan po siya ng, hindi lang po siya yung simpleng nakaupo lang po or isulat yung work. Kumbaga, kasi po performance po siya. So, marami pong role na dapat kampanan yung Meron po siyang actors, director, playwright, tapos meron pa pong nasa production design, art design, tapos in every transition po, di ba, sa bawat scenes, may mga pagpapapalit po ng mga props. Syempre po, hindi po yun kaya po ng isang tao lang po. So, kung baga po, it's a collective effort po of all people na involved po.
Okay.
And final product po nun is, ayun po yung papanood po natin.
Which is? Okay, yes, Anthony. Thank you, Archie.
Sir, parang dagdag lang po dun sa sinabi ni ate kanina. Yun dun sa pagpapalitan ng mga gawain. Parang din po, sabi kasi dito, collective reception. So, parang it turns to me na parang hindi po siya magiging static into one, parang isang venue or yun nga, reception. Kasi di ba marami namang situation, po.
Okay, so hindi siya static, Pero actually, yung sinabi ni, thank you, Anthony. Ay, yung sinabi kanina ni Archie, okay? In terms of like collaborative production, this pertains actually to all the elements involved, into making one scene. Kasi di ba for every scene in a drama or for anything that you watch, actually, it has its objective. It should, let's say, a scene should make you cry, should make you laugh, should make you think. Those are its end objectives. And of course, if those are the objectives, part of achieving those part of achieving those objectives, or what we call the collective reception, is making the elements for these particular scenes work. Okay, so kaya di ba pag minapapansin kayong umiiyak sa TV, normally ang camera technique ay nakafocus dun sa actor. And then ito yung actually one of my favorite camera tricks na laging ginagamit kapag maski sa teleseries and movies. Paano natin nalalaman na let's say ang scene ay nasa let's say dalawang character and then nasa gasaan yung isang character, and of course yung isa ay tatakbo for help, Kumbaga nasa kumbaga ano-ano nila yung nasagsa, and then alam natin na namatay without having like the confirmation na namatay nga. And then kumbaga later on na lang mari-reveal na namatay. However, for that moment, alam na natin na the character was dead. Pansinin ninyo na ang camera trick lagi ganun ay pan out from above, nagpa-pan out yung yung itsura. Diba? So, Laging gano'n ang napapansin ko lang yun. Um, di ba nagpapanaw? Oh, yes, papunta sa langit.
Yes, yes.
Ano? So, that's one of like the tricks na ginagamit to indicate, no? Parang the audience have this collective reception na this character had already passed without having like the confirmation that indeed the character had passed. Okay, ganun lagi ang camera trick. And actually, there was one Filipino film na nag-experiment dito sa collaborative production na to na sinasabi natin na all elements should work. For the lighting, for in terms of lighting, actors, dialogue, everything should work. Eh, di ba sabi ko kanina, dapat lahat ng elements ay in consonance with each other. Kung magka-parallel sila into one specific objective. Balik ko ng objective mo. Yun nga, going back to what I was saying, merong isang film na experiment, Sabi nila, what if natin, ibahin natin yung for like one element, would the entire thing change? Siyempre, oo naman. Alam niyo yung masakit sa dibdib ni Rufa May Quinto na pelikula. Alam niyo yung masakit sa dibdib, yung every time na umiiyak siya, may kumakantang artista na part na kasama doon sa scene. Alam niyo yun? Or am I too old for that? Hindi ba? Actually, yun eh. Sige, hahanapin ko sa YouTube kung meron. Panoorin nyo, nakakatawa actually siya. Ayun nga, with regard to dun sa sinasabi ko kaninang all elements should work together, ito nga ang film na to, nag-experiment siya on that side, sabi, what if ibahin natin, like, what if one element is different from the other one? So would the entire reception or would the entire reception to that scene change? Eh na iba nga, naging comedic na. Kasi imagine, di ba, sa mga drama, kapag may umiiyak na character, there's always a background music to it. And normally, it's a melancholic music. Hindi nila iniba yung melancholic music. However, in terms of like interaction, iniba nila. Ang ginawa nila is, okay, I'm citing this like particular scene from the movie. Yung umiiyak si Rufa May Quinto kasi nasa burol siya ng tatay niya. Ang daming dumadating na kabit. And then here goes Sarah Geronimo, naka-red gown, kumakanta, habang nakipag-interact dun sa mga tao sa lamay kasi nag-aabot siya ng mga tinapay dun sa nasa lamay habang kumakanta siya. So that makes it like comedic. And then nakikipag-interact nga din si Rufa May doon sa So yun yung sinasabi ko na if one element from this collaborative production changes, then the entire vibe or at least the objective of that scene would not be achieved. Say that if you're going on that type of objective. So kaya di ba kapag kaya kaawa na din yung mga magagaling na actors say na low budget yung film. Kasi di ba collaborative production, everything should work. From the actors to the lighting to the camera tricks or techniques and up to the environment where that particular scene is shoot, no. Okay. Oh yes, Jefferson, do you have a question?
In this, sir, pwede po ba magdagdag ng insight? Kasi somehow I just have a different idea.
Sige, go.
Sa second sentence po, sir, I think this is something interesting but something I really love about novels. Basically, sabi dito, the structure of dramatic text. So, structure, unlike other forms, is directly influenced by this collaborative production and collective reception. Something that we might not notice is that when we're reading a book, it has to be sequential. So, yung every element of what is depicted has to be manifested in a certain sequence. So, what is it that you see first? Is it the doorway? What is shown to you first by the author? Pero in drama, whereas it is visually depicted in media, there is no such sequence. At least not to the sense of the plot. It's just that the elements is depicted all at the same time. Kaya it is collaborative. At least yung interpretation ko, sir. Share ko lang.
That's that's actually I'm just looking at or I'm just interpreting the collaborative production and collective reception on the visual side. But however, that's also correct, in terms of like dramatic text. That is really the case. So good for you for pointing that out, Jefferson. Tama yung sabi ni Jefferson, so that's the case for for dramatic text. What I just had given first is the in terms of like the visual presentation side of drama. And then we have, like, of course, under drama, it's either classified as comedy, tragedy, and then historical. No need to explain that. The comedy, no major characters had died with a happy ending, and then tragedy with the death of some major characters. And then now we have the language of literature. No, easily understood language of literature is, yes, Jefferson.
Hindi, sir. Kahit next time na lang po.
Hindi, sige, go. We have plenty of time.
Sige, sir. May question ako, sir. Do you
Oo.
think na, na the death of a major character is a prerequisite to tragedy?
Yes.
Talaga ba, sir? Kasi there are some works that is tragic but parang walang namatay doon.
You're looking at the postmodernist.
Oh, noted,
Yes.
sir. So it is kind of a manifestation of tragedy pero nag-emerge lang siya later.
Oo, yes. Oo.
Oh, okay, sir. Salamat,
Postmodernist
sir.
perspective yun. Pero unlike, in traditionalist, ang tragedy is with the death of a major character. But I understand that some films are tragic because of, without having someone else die. Hinahanap ko pa rin yung masakit sa dibdib, kaya ito, nakakita na ako kasi. Mamaya, ipapakita ko sa inyo. Kaya natatahimik din ako bigla. Okay. So let's now, language of literature. A while ago, di ba, I was saying that literature is a coded text. By coded, we mean that everything that you read there, or at least, it should not be literally consumed or literally interpreted. Okay. So literal language means the usage of meaning in their primary or non-figurative sense. Hence, literal interpretation. And then we have literal versus literary. Literary, relating or having the characteristics of letters, human learning, or literature. Examples. Kasi when we say figurative or literary, it does not always mean na talaga there's an underlying meaning to it. Sometimes it would be simply as having to say something in the opposite sense. That's also literary speaking. And then literal is adhering to fact or to ordinary construction, primary meaning, or a term or expression. Okay? And then speaking figuratively means you say less than what you mean or more than what you mean, or the opposite of what you mean or something other than what you mean. And then broadly defined, it is a way of saying something other than the ordinary. And narrowly defined, a way of saying one thing and meaning the other. Language that cannot be taken literally. Okay? And then literary text, it is a coded text like what I had already explained. It always communicates ideas from its literal meaning. And figures of speech are expressions extending to language beyond its literal meaning, either pictorially or rhetorically. Then there are plenty of types of figures of speech actually, but we will be limiting our discussion to certain types. So literary standards are set of characteristics to determine whether or not a work is literary. So kanina sabi natin, di ba, no criteria exist. However, we have the standards. Okay? But having criteria and standards, the same thing. So universality, one of the literary standard, which means it describes a piece of writing that appeals to the hearts and minds of almost any reader. Likewise, despite the differences, okay, whether a literary text was written by Black American woman. No, even though that's the case, it's still, or that work is still appealing for a lot of people despite of the given differences. That is universality. You know? Artistry is describes literature that is aesthetically appealing and reveals or conveys hidden truth or beauty. And then intellectual value, ano, it's exploring, taking the readers into a bit of a gray area that is normally ano no argued, okay? And then it's thought provoking, promotes critical thinking. It makes readers focus on fundamental truths of life and nature. Suggestiveness relies on emotional power to convey nuances, symbolism, implied meanings, imagery, and messages. Okay? And dito din, the reason why then we have like varying interpretations of certain objects of significance or symbolisms nga in a literary text, it's because of its power of suggestiveness. Okay, kaya di ba implied meanings, imagery, and messages. And the spiritual value lifts up the inner spirit and soul and has the power to motivate and inspire readers. Yung sinasabi ko kanina, di ba? Sabi ko is ano, di ba no criteria exist to determine the literary and non-literary characteristics of a composition. Yet we have the standards, that will point to us the literariness of a composition. Okay? Sabi ko kanina then, is having the standard and criteria the same thing? Syempre hindi. Ay, syempre oo pala, no? Syempre hindi. They are the same thing. However nga, sabi nga natin, we judge the standards based on our own biases. Parang sabi kanina ni Jefferson, what would be the case for, let's say, books that were not written with moral truth or where emotion is touched with certain largeness. Now, what would be the case for that? And in terms of like this standards or criteria, what if I say that this book, even though a lot of people would say that this has spiritual value to it, I do not find any spirituality in it. Would my opinion be diminishing of its prestige, as a masterpiece? Parang ganon. But we will be saving that discussion for a separate course. Di na literature ang Wattpad, fan fiction siya. Di siya spiritual. Totoo naman, And then permanence, even though a lot of literary works were written a long time ago and are being, di ba, just look at how, this literary pieces, despite its antiquity, has been continuously studied, or this being continuously studied in universities, di ba? Or a lot of people still know it, di ba? That is permanence. And style is indicative of, or is unique to writers. Of course, no one has the same style, at least if you are a copycat of the other. Okay? And that concludes our presentation. Do we have any questions?
Wala po.
Sure ba? May tanong ba tayo? Okay, sige, yung i-upload ko yung answer sheet mamaya along with the presentation. Exam spoiler sana, sir. Mabibigyan ko ba kayo ng sample question? Tingnan ko kung anong pwede ditong ibigay. Multiple choice pa rin naman. Ganun naman lahat. Eto, sige. Meron akong example. Eto. So lahat, 'di ba, lahat ng na-discuss natin for this slide, mag-a-appear siya sa exam. So multiple choice nga and 50 items. So ito yung sample question. Alam niyo naman na from theory to practice lagi ang ating tanong bihira tayong magtanong ng ng recalling. So eto.